How many of your videos go something like this? You F3 to face the camera, talk into it while awkwardly moving about, then you toggle to first person, start your vid with maybe an occasional camera shot for a time lapse. There's certainly nothing wrong with this style, and it works for many people. Now, however, I started my channel with an express goal of making unique cinematic videos, and with the newly released Flashback Mod, adding that extra flair to your content has never been easier. Its simple and intuitive design makes it accessible to creators at all levels. This video is going to be a surface level introduction to 9 basic camera movements. My goal is simply to get you thinking of the camera as its own character in your story, helping you to craft more compelling and immersive content. Now, if you find any of these helpful, don't forget to leave a like and maybe consider subscribing. A first-person shot puts the viewer right in the middle of the action, and there's just no better angle for making your audience seeing exactly what you're doing while playing. In Flashback, this is going to be one of the easiest shots to do. Just go ahead and right-click on the character that you want to follow, click on Spectate to jump into that first-person view, and we're going to go ahead and add our camera element, our first keyframe, and let's go ahead and do 10 right here. We'll add a second keyframe, and you can see how we play out on a first person walk along the beach. Now, if you wanted a little bit finer control, if you wanted something that was a little different than just what you already walked, you can also emulate this. And we'll do that by jumping back to our original keyframe. So we're going to shift out to exit out of ourselves, double click to jump back to our keyframe. Let's go ahead and set the time back. And now we're just going to turn off render players. And we're going to go ahead and just reset a new camera element. Go ahead and face ourselves straight, set a keyframe. We'll say it's about 10 seconds or 10 ticks to walk across the beach over here. This might be a little fast, but it's fine. And we'll set our second keyframe. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of that just extra level for that immersion. And we're going to do a camera shake. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to jump back over here. We can add our keyframe, and I like an amplitude of 5. It's gonna look, well, just so you can see what's going on. We'll do an amplitude of 5. We add that right there. We press play, and you can see we're walking across the beach. A bit of a camera shake, a bit of a bob and a weave, just that little bit of randomness to help simulate moving in first person. Now, if you wanted it to stop after you get to this keyframe, you can do that very simply by adding another keyframe. And we just crank the amplitude back down, the amplitude back down. Boom, there you go. And now no more camera shake. Easy peasy. The static shot is as simple as it gets. All you do is you add your camera element, and you're going to add your first keyframe. And what we want to do is we want to make sure we move the type. We're just right click the keyframe, set the type to hold. And that just means the camera is going to snap to that position once the timeline gets there. So if you want to jump between 2 static shots, you have the hold here. And let's say we let my friend Jabek talk a little bit, and then we want to move to a point of view for myself. So I'll put the keyframe right here. I'll put the camera right here. We'll go ahead and set a second keyframe, right click, type, hold. And we can see what happens here. We're going to snap the Jabek. The timeline will happen. We're going to go ahead and speed this up a little bit, and then it'll snap to me. Easy. Now, it's very important to note that if you wanted multiple camera angles, there's no benefit to adding a second camera element. Everything should be done on this one element because Flashback always prioritizes the top element. So you can see that here. What we're going to do is not that way. We want to go ahead and look at Emerald here, and we'll add a keyframe. And what'll happen is you're going to see that it'll snap the Jabek here. It's going to not go to Emerald, and it's going to wait until it gets to my keyframe before snapping there. And you will see that now. And you can see why it's so important to just keep everything on this editor maze here. Just a quick clarification. There are valid uses for using multiple camera elements. However, it's specifically with the static shot, since you were working with still keyframes or hold keyframes, I should say. It's just easier to keep everything on one line, because if you're going to be flitting back and forth between multiple people, you don't want to accidentally override anything and just mess up the shot. That's all I meant. I wanted to make sure that there was no extra confusion there. Back to the vid. Now, the strength of the static shot is that it's exceptionally good for dialogue and also for building showcases. It lets you focus on something without all the unnecessary movement. That's what cinema uses for, and it works just as well here in Minecraft, especially if you have a dialogue like this where, you know, us Minecrafters, we tend to never sit still. I'm just moving all over the place here. So having a nice static shot right here might actually play really well for this scene, depending on how we want it to go. Especially on an SMP, nothing scripted here, so we never never stand still. A pan shot simply describes a left and right turning of the camera across the horizon, while tilt is up and down. Now these movements are great at revealing information to your audience or for following a subject without having to rely on a cut. Tilts in particular are going to be frequently used for showcasing scale, and this can be done great for a build or for making a character feel smaller or larger depending on the exact placement of the camera, so be sure to take note of that. Setting up either shot is extremely easy. As with anything, we're going to start off with the camera element and we're going to set that first keyframe. Now I want to follow this and I want to make sure this is as smooth as possible, so I'm going to go ahead and lock my pitch. That's going to make sure that I can't move up and down. You see, I'm trying really hard. So let's go ahead and reset, move me over to here. As I come through the screen, I'm just going to turn the camera and you'll see that second keyframe, and there we go. And setting up a tilt shot is going to be much the same. What we can do here is maybe we want to do a nice heroic reveal. So we're going to set our first camera element. We're going to add a keyframe. We're going to go to right about here because I don't believe, nope, I haven't moved yet. And we're going to lock the yaw. I don't want to rotate left or right at all. I just want to go up and down. And we're going to go ahead and bring this up here. And then we can add our keyframe. We can see here a nice little reveal. And one of my favorite camera movements is the whip pan, which is simply a pan that whips left or right extremely fast, and it can add a lot of dynamic energy to a scene or even hide a cut as you transition to another one. In order to set this up, it's very simple. We want to make sure the lock pitch so it stays at the same level. We're going to make our camera element. We're going to add our first keyframe, go over just one tick because we want this to be fast. And let's say I want to turn left and we're going to add our second tick. Go ahead and double click here to snap back and it's pretty fast. So let's go ahead and zoom in on the timeline by scrolling in, and we're going to slow things down so that we can see what's happening. Oh, and you can see that we actually turned right instead of left, and that's because Flashback will prioritize based off of the angle of the camera, not necessarily the physical way you turned it. So if we want to make sure that we turn left, all we're going to do is delete this keyframe, and instead of being at a 180, we're just going to do like 179, something like that. We can do right there, that should get it. And now if we reset, you should see that yep, that time we went left, which is what we wanted. Now, some of you might have been able to see it, and I'm going to try to slow this down in the edit. But we don't actually have any motion blur, and that's a problem because we won't be able to hide a cut, and it's just not going to look as clean as it can with motion blur. You are going to want a shader. Most will support this. Now, where exactly this is going to differ from shader to shader. For Reimagined, it's in the camera. We just want to turn on motion blur, apply, and that's it. Now, whenever we reset everything and we play, you see there's a bit of motion blur, and it's in that motion blur that we're going to be able to hide a cut or a transition to your next scene. A push or pull is very simply when you move the camera closer or further away from your subject. In movies, the very general rule of thumb is the closer something is, the more intimate it is, whereas the further out, the more disconnected your audience becomes. This is why comedy is usually shot at a nice wide angle, whereas drama gets way up in your business. Now, pulls are also great for revealing information. If you have something you wanted to show off, you can start with this close-up, keep the audience focused on you, and then you can either go a nice slow pace out to reveal it, or you could even do one of those sharp, fast paces, a nice big drone shot. Notice how the speed at which you push or pull affects the shot. It's going to affect the emotional impact that you're looking to put into the scene. Making one of these, very simple and straightforward. We're going to go ahead and start with a camera element, set that first keyframe, go forward a few, let's say right there, and then you set your second keyframe. The further out you are, the more time it's going to take to get there. Just be mindful of that. Now if we double click to reset the timeline, press play, simple push shot, and go ahead and do the reverse for a pull. A zoom is different from just moving the camera back and forth. Mechanically, in the real world that is, a zoom is a change in the focal length of a camera's lens. In a video game, and in Minecraft specifically, you can replicate this with the field of view option. By changing your field of view, you can simulate a zoom. Now, how this differs from a push or a pull is that with a push, there's going to be physical movement through the world. If you pay attention here, there's going to be a parallax effect as the items in the background move against those in the foreground. Whereas with the field of view, you can see that these trees in the background, that birch tree right there, never changes position. It just kind of zooms in, I guess is the best way to say it. Now, in order to make a zoom in Flashback, we're simply going to add a field of view element. We're going to add our keyframe, set it, and let's say we want a nice gradual zoom in. We add our second one, and we'll bring this down to 11. There you go. Go ahead and reset, press play. And there you go. Nice simple zoom. Reverse that for a zoom out. With like any camera movement, the speed at which you do a zoom can also have a great effect on the energy of your scene. If you're a Tarantino or old Kung Fu fan, then you've definitely seen what's called the crash zoom, where you zoom in real quick, hold it for a moment, and then come back out. It just adds that little bit of spice to his scene. Moving the camera backwards while zooming in can pull the background up to your foreground. Reverse that and move the camera forward while zooming out, and you get this fantastic vertigo effect where the background seems to just fall away from the foreground. By adjusting your focal length at the same rate that you move a camera forward or backwards, you can get what's called the Dolly Zoom. And this trick can be used for a wide number of unique and interesting visual effects. To replicate this, we're going to go ahead and add that first camera element and drop our first keyframe. We're going to go just a little bit back. This is not a very long shot, and I want this to be as smooth as possible. So I'm going to lock my yaw, lock my pitch, so I don't accidentally move to the left or right or pitch the camera up and down. And then we're going to go back a little bit, say right about there, and it's just a kind of a guessing game at first. Play with it and you'll start to get the hang of it. You'll get an idea for the distance, but let's go ahead and drop that second keyframe. Now we're going to go ahead and add a field of view element. And it's here that we're going to go ahead and set it to our default or set it at a farther field of view. So I like 80 right here, and right here, we're going to go ahead and bring this way down. It should be at about 15 for this distance. And with this, you should be able to see we nailed it. And it should just be the reverse if you want the reverse effect of the background falling away from your character. So definitely play around with this. It's an effect I just don't see enough in Minecraft videos, and I'd love to see more of it and see how you guys get creative with it. The roll shot involves rotating a camera along its long axis. Rolling the camera is generally used to disorient and balance the viewer, and just kind of lets them know visually that something's not quite right. You might see this in film with what's called the Dutch shot, where something is just slightly canted, and it helps add just a little bit extra of unease, fear, tension to a scene. Now, of course, this being Minecraft, our camera is not going to be affected by things like wind or gravity, so adding a slight roll is an excellent way of simulating that dynamic movement. So where you can see here, you start with that roll, you come in, cant over to the right again to simulate turning into it before we even out to end the drone shot. And it's just little things like this that's going to help take your video up to that next level. An arc shot is simply when you take a camera and you rotate it around or orbit a subject. And if you've ever seen a Michael Bay film, you've seen this shot. It's also just a staple in showcases and time lapses for the obvious. You can get that big 360 view. Now, setting up an arc shot in Flashback can be done in a few different ways. You can, just like here, use a camera element with multiple keyframes and bring yourself on down, but it is going to take some tweaking to get that nice smooth arc. Or alternatively, you can use the camera orbit element. Now, the camera orbit element, it's a little tricky to set up at first. It's not inherently intuitive. It's probably the least intuitive option in the mod, but we're going to go ahead and you'll see it. We're going to arc all the way around in a nice wide 360. And since you only need 2 keyframes for it, everything's nice and smooth. And if you wanted to pair this off with another arc, you can do that just with another element. Just keep in mind that you need to make sure not to overlap keyframes. Do not add any keyframes on this element here, or else it's just going to overlap this one below it. But you can see that here, we're going to do a nice big circle. And then I used the orbit to go ahead and bring myself back. You can get kind of creative with it. So let's go ahead and set up your first arc shot. And we're going to concentrate on the camera orbit since that's going to be the slightly more complicated one. So we're going to go ahead and make that element. We're going to set our first keyframe. And right off the bat, we can see that things are a little different. We have a distance, a yaw, and a pitch. Distance is going to be based off of where your camera is currently located. So that's about 8 blocks away. Your yaw is going to be how far around the rotation for this orbit is going to be. So 180 for a half, 360 for a full, 720 gets 2. Math. And the pitch is going to be a little unique. It is not based on the tilt of the camera, but the vertical path the camera moves. So if you set a high pitch, the camera will actually move up while doing its rotation, and a low pitch, it goes down while doing its rotation. But it's always going to be focused on the starting point, that center point of the orbit. So let's set that keyframe, and we're just going ahead and leave everything as is right there. And then we set a second keyframe. This is going to be what makes it orbit. And let's go ahead and do that 360 circle. So we'll set a yaw of 360, press add, we're going to come back and play. And we notice that something a little different happened. For some reason, we've started behind my character. The reason for that is because the yaw is not based relative to the camera's starting point, but based on the world. So a 0-0 yaw is always going to face south, as you can see here. And if you don't have mini HUD, F3. So if you wanted to be able to face north, which would allow us to face my character right here, we would need to right click and set the yaw to 180. So let's go ahead and do that. Bring it back and press play. Okay, so now you can see that something else has happened. Because this is now at 180, this 360 isn't really cutting it. So what we would need to do is add an extra 180 to this. So we're just going to go ahead and set that to 540. So we now should have a nice smooth circle going around. Now, as I said, if you wanted to play with the pitch, you definitely can. So let's say we wanted to bring this up 20 blocks, and we're going to see that we're going to do this really nice spiral up, but the camera is still kind of focused on me. So yeah, I know the camera orbit, it's not very intuitive the first time around. Just tinker with it. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, play around and have some fun. And just remember that the yaw is always going to be based off the cardinal direction in the world, not the relative direction of your camera. A tracking shot simply describes any moment when the camera is following along through a scene with a character or subject. That could be from the front, from the side, from the back, from on top. The direction isn't as important as long as the camera is physically moving along through the scene with somebody or something. Now let's say that I want a nice long tracking shot as I walk along the beach, and I want to be able to see the ocean in the distance. To do this in Flashback, it's very easy. We're going to start by setting our first camera element and our keyframe. Now we don't have a way to auto track a character to just set this as they go along. We're going to need to do this by hand. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start the replay. So I start moving. I'm going to follow along, and let's say right about here, let's just drop our keyframe and see what that does. Let's see how that looks. So let's play. All right, that's not bad, but we can see that I was losing a bit of this space back here, and you want this breathing room here, and you want to make sure that the majority of the space is in front of your character. Let's let the viewer know that this is the direction I'm moving. There's a lot going on here, and I don't feel too claustrophobic. And we want to make sure we don't lose that space behind the character, because it's just going to make it look like they're getting cut off. There's a bit of an unprofessional feel to it. And all we really have to do to slow it down a little bit is just move this just a few ticks forward, and that should fix it. Let's see. There it is. You can see that's far more consistent. And that really is all there is to it. It's just going through piece by piece until you're happy with the shot and you got the scene that you're trying to set up. These camera movements are just one of the many tools available to you in Flashback. Now, as you saw, they are very simple scenes, but like anything in Minecraft, you can build upon and combine these basic concepts to create something wholly new and unique. I'm far from an expert, and I mess up shots and make mistakes all the time. However, I had a lot of fun learning everything needed to make this video, and I'm excited to continue doing so. So be sure to leave a comment if you have any questions about the mod. I'm going to be happy to dig into it. I hope you enjoyed these tips. See you in the next video. Ciao.